managing programmers. And, I think you really have to think about the trade-offs are that as a programmer, you're working on code, you're working on making thought stuff work. You're working on hard technical challenges. And when you succeed, it's so ecstatically wonderful that you jump out of your chair and scream with delight. At least I have. And you don't get that as a manager. You don't get the same ecstatic excitement and joy coming from achieving. And you also don't get quite the same level of despair right before you hit that level of joy. But as a manager, you've got much more breadth. You've got more say in the game. You've got less say about any particular thing. You've got less ability to dive deep, but you've got way more ability to dive broad. And it's just a fundamental decision of where do you want to spend your time and how do you want to spend your time. Do you want to spend your time helping a whole group of people to get that ecstatic joy? Or do you want to be the one getting the joy?
For a programmer, that joy comes from, as you said, putting code out that works. But what does success look like for a manager? How do you judge yourself on have I been successful?
It's a much less measurable kind of result, but it's a feeling that I've got a team that's really, really on the same wavelength, a team that's really gelling, a team that's really becoming a high performance team. And I've helped to enable that. I've helped people to see what their connection is to the bigger picture. I've helped people to see how what they're doing is delighting customers. I've helped people to see how working together, we can get more synergy and more power and more success than we can just working as individuals. I've helped people to see how to have each other's backs and to respect and trust and really come together as a team, not just a group of individuals. And there's a huge amount of gratification that comes from looking at your team and realizing that you've done that.
So you talked about what success looks like as a manager, but in your book, you also describe the pointy-haired boss. And that's kind of an archetype for what a bad manager looks like. What is a pointy-haired boss?
Yeah, well, the pointy-haired boss comes out of Dilbert, and it's the boss none of us, hopefully no one listening to this show wants to be the pointy-haired boss. We're all trying to be the opposite of that archetype. We're trying to be the boss who programmers come away and say, it was great working for Ron. If he ever calls me again to work on one of his teams, I'm going to go do that because it was a peak experience for me.
Is it a matter of avoiding doing certain bad things, or is it something positive you have to go after, or a combination?
Oh, absolutely a combination. We managers need to figure out how to set boundaries without micromanaging, how to set goals without telling people what to do and how to do it, how to enable them to own pieces of the code that they're working on and bring their best selves to that code and bring all of their thinking and their options and possibilities to that code and to create something better and to delight customers in ways that they didn't expect to be delighted.
Can you describe what happens when a manager tells a programmer what to do and also how to do it?
One of the examples that I give of what we have to avoid in Agile asks everybody on a team to step up. It asks teams to come together as teams. And what micromanagement does is it causes people to step back. If I'm a programmer and I've got somebody telling me what to do and how to do it, I'm going to step back and say, okay, I've got that done. What do you want me to do next? What do you want me to do next? What do you want me to do next? I'm going to become an order taker instead of bringing my whole self to both the product and to my team. And it's really counterproductive. It's really counterproductive on the part of managers.
And part of bringing your whole self is also bringing that right-brained aspect that you were talking about, the creativity. Do you have an example of something that a programmer contributed that just was out of left field that you weren't expecting that made a positive impact?
I'll bring an example of my own. When I was a programmer, we were doing a brand new device that didn't exist yet. And the inventor of that device, this was both electronics and software, and I was working on the software part of it that was going to be embedded in this device. And the inventor of the device came to us with a manual for his device. This is what I'm going to give to users. This is how the thing works. You guys figure out how to create the guts, how to make this thing deliver what it is that I'm asking for. And it was possibly the only project I ever worked on as a programmer, and possibly the only one I've seen since, that there were no ambiguities in what he wanted. It was really clear. The what was really clear, but he wasn't giving us any of the how. He was saying, bring yourselves to this and give me the best that you can give me. And the what was so clear that it was like rolling down a hill, delivering what he wanted. And I had time left over to bring that right brain, left brain stuff you were just talking about. I invented a way of storing that data. This is very early on when there was very little memory and the kind of storage spaces that we were doing. And I invented a new way of doing that. And he got a patent on the encryption method that I invented for doing that. And it was because he didn't tell me how to do it. It was because he only said, here's what I imagine I want to deliver for my customers.
Do you think that most of the time that information or those requirements or goals or even values aren't communicated down clearly enough to the developers? Is that the cause of a lot of problems that we see?
Communication in every way is one of the big problems that I run into just over and over and over again. Fundamentally, software development, fundamentally product development is a team sport. And we need to talk to each other. So one of the big chasms is between the people who wear the title product manager and the people who wear the title developers and testers. And what we need is to understand the what without being told the how, but we need to understand as much of the what as possible. And we need to understand really what problem it is that our customers are trying to solve and how they're struggling with it and what that really represents. And then we need to apply our brains to it as developers and testers to come up with options that our product managers can look at and say, oh, that one will blow our customers away. Fundamentally, there's, so we've got a rule, Mickey and I came up with a rule of thumb that you can't over-communicate in product teams. Now, it's possible that on the sales side, they can over-communicate. It's possible on the marketing side, they can over-communicate, but I'm pretty sure that in product development, we can't over-communicate.
Many organizations use the Scrum or agile process for that communication between the team and the product managers. And you pointed out in one of your talks that in the agile diagram, the manager isn't even depicted. So that brings up the question, if we're agile, why do we need managers?
Coach in Scandinavia, name of Henrik Nieberg, who has done some work in Scrum with Spotify, actually, and has written about that. And he's got some diagrams that basically show teams being self-organizing and self-sufficient in a lot of ways. What are not self-sufficient are the groups of people within them. So we create these cross-functional teams that have web developers and business logic developers and database developers and product managers and Scrum masters and testers and sometimes DBAs and other functions in them. And there's a team, and that team can deliver business value to customers. But what it can't do is the care and feeding of the function of the kind of work doesn't happen inside of that team. The database developers need best practices. The database developers need to grow their careers. And if within their teams, they continue to be focused on delivering stuff to customers, they won't be focused on growing their careers, on growing their ability in their field on communicating across teams with the other people who do what they do and to best practices and how we use best practices and how we leverage standards and how we do stuff in an effective way within our particular specialty. And what managers do is to feed all of that and support all of that. And think of it as we've talked about matrixed organizations, and I'm not sure that this is exactly a matrixed organization in the classic sense, but it's definitely a matrixed organization from the standpoint that teams are self-organizing, but the web developers report to somebody who did web development, whose job it is not to tell them what to do, but to enable them and support them in their growth and in their best practices and in their communications across their specialty to doing their best work.
That goes back to your coach analogy, where the manager is like a coach and making sure that the team is structured the right way, maybe that they have individuals that fill all the different skill and various roles, and also that they're progressing in the way they need to progress in order to get better at their game.
Yeah. I'm not a sports guy. I'm really not a sports guy. But when I was at Schwab in 1999 or 2000, I had a management coach who thrust a sports guy book into my hands. So the book was Sacred Hoops by Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson, I have no idea who Phil Jackson was, but it turns out Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls at the time, has since then been the coach of the LA Lakers. At that time had won a number of NBA records with the Chicago Bulls, and since then, between the Bulls and the Lakers, has won 11 rings on his hand. And his goal was to create a self-organizing basketball team. So this is a guy who inherited Michael Jordan. He inherited a number of other players too, but I hadn't heard of them. All of you probably have, but I hadn't heard of them. But I had heard of Michael Jordan. He inherited Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had set every shooting record that existed, it seemed like, and the Chicago Bulls were not winning. His goal was to create a team in which Michael Jordan was part of the team and everyone else didn't just stand back and look at Michael Jordan in awe, but they actually played together and they worked together and they passed the ball together. Phil Jackson, I played a little bit of basketball when I was in middle school, which is why I really don't think about basketball because I swore it off after middle school. But I remember thinking, gee, we get in trouble out there in the court. What we do is turn and look at the coach. Phil Jackson's method was, I want you guys to look at each other. My goal in practice is to guide your work so that when you get into trouble, you look at each other. You look to each other. And he says in one of those two books, he says, when my team is firing, not only does the other team not know what my team is going to do next, my team doesn't know what it's going to do next. They watch each other and they play off of each other. If you think about that, that's like improv in acting, or it's like free jazz in music, where every single member of an improv team and every single member of a free jazz group is a soloist from time to time, but they play off of each other and no one knows when their solo is going to come up for sure.
I love that analogy with the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan because it touches on what you said in your book about the distribution of skills in a team and how there are certain programmers that make outsized contributions, but that may not be enough in order to have a successful team and to launch a successful product. But I would like you to talk a little bit about that as we dive into teams and building a team. Can a good manager take any group of individuals and turn it into a successful team?
Well, so one of the, we were talking earlier about categories of programmers, and there's a category that Mickey and I labeled jerks and bozos. There is a category of that probably in every category of work. And when